I auditioned 7 times over 6 weeks to get the role of Commander Riker on Star Trek: The Next Generation. You're very good at this. You got me very comfortable. Well done.
I'm gonna let you into secret. This is the first one we've ever shot.
No way. But I do meditate at lunch, especially when I'm shooting, and it serves two purposes. First of all, it's TM, and I do a little harmonic breathing and all that stuff, and it slows you way down, and I try to see my third eye and all that shit that you've heard about. Sometimes it turns into a nap, which is almost as valuable.
Today's guest is actor and director Jonathan Frakes, known to millions as Riker in Star Trek. I first met Jonathan over 20 years ago when he directed me in the Hollywood remake of Thunderbirds, and it was a real privilege to sit down and chat with him and hear his story. If you enjoy the episode, please do like and subscribe. It would mean the world to me, and it helps us get the podcast into the hands of as many people as possible. There is some real magic in this episode. Enjoy. Jonathan, welcome to the show. My first question for you, what is the most important thing that you've ever had to pitch for?
What a great question. I auditioned 7 times over 6 weeks to get the role of Commander Riker on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
So I've heard. So talk me through that process. Like that's intense.
Yeah, it was nuts, actually. Ironically, I wore the same shirt each time because it was like a baseball player and your football. You know how superstitious jocks are about keeping their dirty underwear on. I wore this shirt, and by the 7th audition, the shirt was, I could practically step into it at any rate. It was fine in the beginning. I had met the casting director who I'd worked for before. That was wonderful, and I met one of the producers, and then as it went on and became clear that there was a chance that this could be something. I also was, to be honest and completely frank, was not aware of the cultural phenomenon that Star Trek is.
Yeah.
Not unlike Thunderbirds, but in a very it's a much bigger deal than pilot season. As you know, your pilot season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody tries to get a job, and then you're lucky if you get a pilot, and then you're really lucky if the pilot goes to series, and then you're really lucky if the series lasts, and you can go out and you can buy a car. So this was a pilot for a television show that had been canceled in the 60s, but somehow had its life. Star Trek, Bill Shatner's Star Trek, had a real life after it had been on the air. And there was a very reluctant audience for a new Star Trek, including our fearless leader, Gene Roddenberry, who created the show. So he insisted that it, first of all, not be on a network because he had fought radically with NBC. So one of the reasons I auditioned 7 times was I had to go meet all these different executives because the show had been sold to 237 separate outlets in the United States.
Wow.
So there were different departments and different television companies that had to approve the people that were going to be in this show that they bought. But the upside of these 7 auditions was that during the last few, I would go to Roddenberry's office before we'd go to whatever executive I need to impress in my dirty shirt. What I thought, my Star Trek shirt, which I should have worn it for you today. I thought,
do you still have it?
Of course I do. And luckily I can still get in it. But it's I go to Roddenberry's office, and he, among other things, he really was a visionary, and he would tell me what he thought the future would be like. And in the 24th century, Jonathan, there will be no hunger, and there will be no greed, and all of the children will know how to read, and there'll be no sexism, and there'll be no racism. He believed all these things that we practiced on the show, and that I wish people would practice in the 21st century. But that's another story. So ultimately, I was hired, and we went to work. But they were so skeptical about the show. We had 3 contracts. We had a contract to do a pilot. Then we had a contract, if that went well, to do 13 episodes. And then if that went well, we had a contract that would be a 26-episode season with an additional 3 or 4 years. So as it unrolled, it became clear that, and then by this point, I knew that I was on a train that could potentially change my life, and did. From that, I'm sure, is how I met you, from having success on this show and then making the movies with them. Anyway, it was a long and winding road that changed my life.
So seven auditions. There's got to be there's got to be a sense of nerves there, right? As well as you kind of tick each one off, the stakes seem to get higher.
Exactly, and if anything, you get more nervous instead of less nervous. I had an agent when I was very young, when I first started in New York, a commercial agent, a woman whose name was Tex Bea. And her philosophy about auditioning, which is what I've tried to adopt and share with other actors, was that you do the audition as if you already have the job, and this is just a version of this is like the first take of your doing the job, and then if you get it, great, and if you don't. And then she also said, if you can visually, the metaphor was, when you leave the building of where you auditioned, you leave the audition in the building when those doors close behind you. So I used to practice both of those sort of, whatever those would be, transcendental or Buddhist or Hindu kind of visions of what it would be like. So you act as if, as they say in certain worlds, you act as if you've got it and you're just here to do it. And then when you've done the audition, which you're naturally nervous about and uptight about, and your heart's beating wrong and your blood pressure's, all the things that happens when you have nerves, which reminds you that you're alive, it reminds you that you care about the job, but it also can block your creative freedom. So I've always tried to practice that, but I still, when I'm shooting, the first day of shooting, I can't sleep. It's like Christmas Eve for me, because I hope I get everything today. I hope I get, and I think if that ever goes away, maybe I should stop.
Hang up the shirt.
Hang up the shirt. The shirt, exactly.
Do you have any kind of process for dealing with those nerves in the moment? Like, I kind of have to jump around and move and, take a few deep breaths. Is there anything in particular that you do?
Yeah, I have. I've gotten in the last 10 years or so into and it's not specifically to that, but I do meditate at lunch, especially when I'm shooting. And it serves two purposes. First of all, it's TM, and I do a little harmonic breathing and all that stuff, and it slows you way down, and I try to see my third eye and all that shit that you've heard about. Sometimes it turns into a nap, which is almost as valuable.
Yeah, just as good.
Right? And sometimes, you really do get in some of that wonderful rhythmic TM world. And the third advantage is, I found, nobody can call a meeting for me at lunchtime. Say, oh, by the way, we're going to do this at lunch. Or, by the way, we're going to do it. So in the beginning of each show that I'm on, I said, I have a thing that I do at lunch, and I need a little cubby in one of those honey wagons, just I need a place to lunch. And they say, oh, yeah, I've heard that about you. So you're spared those meetings that everybody tries to squeeze into your 14-hour day.
That's amazing. I mean, I think kind of protecting your time in that way is so precious, and having.
But it took me a long time to learn to do it, and the value of it is that it's not this way as much as it was, but when we were together, I'm sure it was. People eat like a pig at lunch because it's free food, and then by 3:30 they go into this meat coma from having eaten essentially Sunday roast for lunch. So I come out of my meditation and I get a little bowl of tuna or a couple of pieces of turkey. I get some protein, pound it, have a cup of coffee, and go back to work. And then I can carry some of those meat combed grips and electricians on my back if I have to for the middle of the afternoon.
You're sharp.
Or juicers, as we call it in your country.
There you go. So Riker's the one that kind of you got, but what was the one that got away?
Oh, what a great question. What a great question. Actually, I don't hold on to one, but God, there were sure plenty of them. I remember seeing, I'm sure it's the same for you, that you always saw the same guys in the waiting room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So there was the
I mean,
usual suspects.
Thunderbirds, like, we're walking into that audition room at Universal's office was just it was like a clone factory of people that all looked the same. It was hilarious.
I know, and they were, I imagine, people that you'd seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was certainly that way with me. And then some of them go on to become. I mean, I remember auditioning against people like Bruce Willis, and the people who are my age who became Travolta. People who
Right.
I auditioned for Travolta's part on Welcome Back, Kotter. Do you remember
Amazing.
that show?
Yeah. Did you get through the rounds on that, or was that just a?
Well, of course not. I mean, here's a little anecdote. Anson Mount, who's the captain of the latest Star Trek success, who was Captain Pike on Strange New Worlds. I worked with him for a whole year on Discovery. One lunchtime, ironically, he called the crew together and said, I got something I want to say right before lunch. I want to thank everybody, and I got to show you this. And he had found on YouTube my audition tape from Welcome Back, Kotter, which I hadn't seen since,
Wow.
I guess it would have been the 70s. This was probably, because I started in the 70s. So Anson tracked this thing down and made this poor crew sit through a bad audition for Welcome Back, Kotter. So then I guess we could call that the one that got away.
That's the one that got away. So take me back to the beginning then. Did you always want to be an actor? How did you start out?
I did some acting in high school and junior high school, but I never thought of it as a career. I was raised by my dad was an English professor and a bit of a film nut and a book critic, and so there was a great appreciation of the craft and of the arts. But I went to college. I went to Penn State, and I wanted to be a psychiatrist, I thought, and so I went in as a psych major, thinking that I would become a shrink, which has helped me certainly in my work as a director. But I had to start in the summer. I started a week after I got out of high school because I had originally wanted to take a gap year, the way you guys wisely do in Europe, which is invaluable. Both of my kids dropped out of their first colleges because they didn't take a gap year. Anyway, my mom said, Jim, you got to get Jonathan into it. I can't have him. So anyway, my dad pulled some strings. I got him to Penn State. And so I went to the theater department because I wanted to go see some plays. And if you signed up to be an usher, you could get into the play for free. And so I was signing up on this board to see a production of Arthur Coppett's Indians. And the director came down the hall, Richard Edelman, who became one of my mentors. He said, hey, young man, what do you do? I said, well, I wanted to come see this play. He said, oh, I'm directing that play. Would you like to be in it? I said, sure, what do you want? He said, can you think you can keep the rhythm on a drum? I said, yeah, probably. He said, and it was like, I don't know who it was. Wild Bill Hickok had a Wild West show, and that was part of the play. And I was to sit on the stage and play the drum in this one little scene. So I said, sure. He said, well, come to rehearsal this afternoon. And anyway, it was a professional company from New York, filled with wonderful actors from the Guthrie and Actors Theater Louisville and the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., and they had people from Actors Studio and Lee Strasberg. So there were all these actors who had come to the middle of Pennsylvania in the summer, which was this glorious, it was called Happy Valley. It was gorgeous. They were doing this play. And they'd rehearse Indians during the day, and then they were performing another play that I don't remember the title of at night. And I was around these people. I was 17. And I thought, this is kind of cool, isn't it? They'd go to work at 10 in the morning, they'd rehearse for a few hours, then they break for dinner, then they come and go to the theater half hour at 7:30. The performance goes from 8 to 10, and then by 10:30 they're in the bar.
Yeah.
And I thought, is this a real job? This is the way it is. And as I hung around them and I was influenced by them and I learned from them, and I said, well, what if I trained to be an actor? So I became a theater major and got the single, I don't know about in your experience, but the single most useless thing you can get as a parchment, as a degree from a university.
Yeah, piece of paper.
I have a BFA, a Bachelor's in Fine Arts, with a concentration in acting. Now that piece of paper, and and $5 will get you coffee, and that's it's useless, right? Most careers, there's a ladder. There's a ladder that you can climb, and you've learned this as well as your ladder is now leading you to another way to express yourself and express your artistic needs, and my ladder is now directing, which also is a little vague, but acting has no ladder, right? The ladder's on the ground. There's luck, there's appearances, there's right place at the right time, there's people's taste. I mean, there's no logical progression like there would be with a good grip can do a really good job, and then he works well and he works efficiently, and then he becomes the best boy, and then he becomes the key grip. A good makeup artist can put on a prosthetic faster and faster. Oh, look, it looks so realistic. He's really good. You move up in all the crafts in a way that there's no ladder in fucking acting. It's horrible.
So, I mean, in terms of your career then, you did you start out and do some theatre, or did you head straight over to Los Angeles and want to get into the world of film and TV?
My idea of success, based on my experience at university, was that if you could get into a repertory company like the Guthrie in where is it, Minneapolis, or the Arena, as I mentioned, one of these big repertory companies, that was the peak of being an actor, or being on Broadway, obviously. So when I finished school, I'd done a couple of summer stock things, and I moved to New York, and I got an agent. I did some off-Broadway and some off-Broadway, and then I got onto a soap, and then I had auditioned for this to go in as a replacement in this Broadway musical called Shenandoah, and I was hired on the soap. I played a Vietnam vet child beater who had delusional brain, so that was a great character. And I was in the chorus on this musical called Shenandoah with one scene. And so now I had two jobs. I was unattached. I was living in New York. And I thought, well, this is it. This is better than the dream of being in a regional theater. So I did all that for a while, and then I got killed off in the soap, and the show closed, and my agent suggested, well, now you're ready. You should go to L.A. We have an agency out there. And so I moved out there and got in line with the other millions of actors who had the same dream.
And what was that like, kind of moving, I suppose, from New York seems to me to be a little bit more kind of intimate. People know each other, but then you kind of get out into LA and there's just so much going on. How did you manage your mindset out there?
That's a very perceptive point of view. In New York, there's a kind of a theater community, and there's kind of and on the soaps in that, this is again in the 70s, there were 18 soaps, so there was work in New York. People could get a job. Yeah. And to go to LA, it was, first of all, you had to have a car, and you had to have a place to live, and everything is, LA is not easy. It's really not easy now because it's way too crowded and dirty, and but even then it was I had a friend from college who had moved out there and was doing okay, and he lived with another friend, so I was able to stay in their house. So I had that same story that a lot of people had, that you stay on somebody's couch for a while. But I'm from the East Coast. I'm raised in Pennsylvania, so I was used to the seasons where you had winter was winter and fall as the leaves drop. And it's always the same in LA. It's always hot and it's always sunny. And I know that sounds great, but it's also smoggy and dirty and filled with fucking actors. I mean, there are more actors. Everybody you talk to is an actor. You buy in the supermarket, an actor. Obviously, all the waiters are actors. The guys who park the car, the guys who drive the buses, the taxi driver. Everybody's an actor. It was horrible. Horrible.
So how do you make yourself stand out in that crowd? I mean, yeah, you're a big guy, but
that's my point.
What else?
I stood out as that's the one thing I had. I was tall. And, but there was. It's what I said about the ladder. There's no ladder. That's why so much of it is luck, I think, and perseverance and believing in yourself, which I guess I did then. I certainly do now. I have a certain confidence that I think people, especially as a director, you have to have a certain confidence that they believe you know what you're doing so that they can trust you to make their day. But as an actor, I'm sure you have the same experience. People see something in you or something clicks, you remind them of somebody that they like or don't like. I mean, it's so unpredictable. As I said, I discourage young people, and I try to discourage them unless there's something that you just can't not do it. Of course, we all feel that way. I'd have to do it, like the world needs more actors, really.
I suppose the thing about acting is it is a craft, and whilst it's not necessarily linear in the way that you describe, the ladder's on the floor rather than up the wall. Mm-hmm. If you don't deliver, then they burn the ladder. So there must be something about the kind of discipline and the kind of rigor with which you approach that craft that gets you noticed and allows you another opportunity to kind of pick the ladder up and have another go.
That's a very good point. I think, like in most things too, that whole thing about luck is you have to be whatever. There's a wonderful cliche that I am now completely screwing up about preparation. Something leads to, So if you are fortunate enough to get a job, you've got to be prepared to do it. You got to know how to show up on time. You got to know your lines. You got all the things, all the essentials. The very few essentials that actors have are to be on time, know your lines, and collaborate.
Yeah.
And as you know, some actors are 0 for 3 on that. And that blows my mind.
But I mean, I think there's a kind of tendency sometimes for ego to get in the way in that environment, and I think the people that, not necessarily the people that are most successful, but probably the people that are most long-lived learn to let go of the ego. Maybe they have it at the beginning and let go of it along the way, but there seems to be this kind of, you mentioned the word collaboration, and I think that's so important. You think about the cast of Star Trek, it's a cast of stars rather than an individual. And I was looking up on IMDb, good old IMDb, 176 episodes. It says, right? That's a lot of time to spend together with the same team. Like, how do you manage that journey?
Well, that's the easy part, and we were blessed on our show because we are all still very good friends. We all stood up at each other's weddings and went through each other's divorces and are godparents to each other's kids. So that's a standalone. I was actually thinking about this question in relation to our show, and the late great Bill Paxton, who was a wonderful leader, he wasn't egoless, but he certainly had his ego in check. He knew his place in the world, and we had, arguably one of the greatest actors in the world. We had Sir Ben Kingsley on our show, whose approach to acting, as he says publicly, is not to judge the character, as you can see from that performance in Sexy Beast.
Yeah.
And to and he was the consummate actor, I guess, from all those years at the RSC. He'd come on the set when he was called. He was already in costume. He would sit on the set. He knew all the grips, the grips and the juicers, and because he'd worked in the country for so long. Yeah. And it was. They were both great examples, and I thought they were great examples for you guys. Tell the story about Bill.
They were. I mean, I've told you this story before, but I remember being having just got the part of Virgil and sort of being kind of over the moon, and had told a few friends about it and all of this sort of stuff. But it was still, I think it was still kind of embargoed. We weren't allowed to really talk about it publicly. and I was walking to my girlfriend's house, and I got a phone call, and this voice on the end of the phone said, "Hey, Virgil, it's your dad." And I was like, well, "Who the hell is this?" Like some American accent. Someone's pulling my chain at this point. And I walked into an underpass, and the phone signal cut out. And at that moment, it dawned on me that Bill Paxton had just phoned me, and he'd phoned me with his number withheld, so I couldn't phone him back. So I was like, "Oh my God, like what have I done?" The terrible first impression. Luckily, he phoned back, and he was calling to arrange for the Tracy brothers to get together at his hotel, go out for drinks, have dinner, and this was all kind of well before shooting was kicking off. But he wanted to make that kind of family, I suppose. And I think that was one of the things that was amazing about the atmosphere that you created on set, and the way that you collaborated with Bill and Sir Ben, is that there was this kind of camaraderie all the time. You never felt vulnerable or on your own. It was always a kind of feeling of comfort and support, and everyone had your back.
Yeah, that was it, and that's the perfect environment. I've always, as a director, tried to create an environment, and I say to them publicly, I say, there's no mistakes. If you want to try something, you try something. It's, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but please feel free. And Sir Ben was so humble, or that's not exactly the right word, but he said to me early on, after I printed a take, he said, I don't dare do his accent, he said, if you've got a print, would you mind if I tried a little something? I thought, oh my God. Yeah. Gandhi, feel free. You can have as many takes as you like. We'll take everything you got. Would you mind if you try something? It was, what a treat.
I mean, that experimentation as an actor, as a director, is, I suppose, something that is often a challenge, kind of taking risks. Where do you kind of see your role as a director kind of fitting into that and facilitating that?
That's a really good question. I feel you can sort of tell how prepared an actor is, and also on television now, you have the writer with you generally, and you want to make sure that if it hasn't been discussed in the tone meeting, which is a big part of prep, maybe the most important part of prep is where you literally go through every beat of the script with the writer of the script or the showrunner, and you discuss, even when you think it's quite obvious what the intention of that scene is, or what the turn in that scene is, so you discuss all aspects of the episode. And then when you get on the set, sometimes the actor will have a different idea than what the writer intended, or sometimes the director and the writer disagree on what the intent. It's a great part of the collaboration, and it can be done with civility, and it can be done hostilely, and it can be done. Different people do it in different ways. I had an actor who shall remain nameless, who didn't learn the lines until he got to the set because he wanted to find it in the moment. He didn't really have time to work like that. Luckily, this actor, very clever man, had a photographic memory. So the lines were not an issue when we got the lines that he wanted to say in place. So I would say it's one of the great parts of the job is the how when you find the scene, even before you've turned over the camera, you find it and you find the beats. And
it's interesting. I talk a lot. I talk a lot to clients about their intention now, and it just in the way that we communicate in life. What is it that you're trying to make other people feel?
Yes.
And I think it's so important.
That's such an acting technique.
Yeah.
Isn't that?
But it changes the performance, doesn't it? Instantly when you start to be able to not just think about you, but actually think about the audience or the other actor in the scene, then somehow it kind of creates a level of freedom, I think.
Well, it does, and it also the intention can be different from take to take, or the scene can change based on how you what do you want? What is your objective? What do you need? Is it, and if it's someone else's scene, your intention can be to help them, or if your character is the villain, the intention is to block them. The intentions change your behavior, but you have to have it. You have to have an intention, or the lines don't make any sense, or it'll be a bore, frankly.
Yeah, and it just sort of flatlines, and no one cares. That's the key.
Yeah, and I think in the work you're doing, where you're advising leaders how to lead better, intention is essential. And I bet there are people who come to you and think, I haven't really thought about that. I haven't.
It's normally a massive aha moment for people, because it's just not something that you focus on. But for an actor, it's kind of the center of everything.
Yes, it's kind of the first thing. And then that's also what happens on the set. If there's a section of a scene that is not clear to an actor, you have the writer there or the director, but generally you have both. You say, I don't really understand what I want here, or what the character wants here, I should say.
Yeah.
And it could be very helpful. And maybe, or I believe the character wants this, and the writer said, I hadn't even thought of that. It's great.
Yeah. So we've talked quite a lot about your kind of directing, but we haven't talked about how you bridged from being an actor to becoming a director. What was that process like?
I was, as you know, there's a lot of waiting on a set. And we had a cast, I think, of about 8 regulars, and we did 26 episodes a year, as you mentioned, 170. So in the beginning, it was pretty clear that there was a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
And I can only take so many naps, and you can only watch so much TV, and only read the papers, So I ended up spending a lot of time on the set, because it's such it's a privilege to be on a show. And it's what we've dreamed of. So I spent a lot of time in the set, and it was clear that sort of hub around the camera and the video village, and the hub is where the show is built from, and at the center of that hub was the director. And I like people, and you have to have people skills to do that job. The overused phrase is the storytelling. We all want to be storytellers. So I asked the boss, who was at this point Rick Berman, and he said, why don't you shadow a few of the directors, which is you follow them around day to day, which I did incessantly. So for over 2 years, I shadowed all the directors every day. The days that I didn't work, I came in, and there was one day, God bless her, my sweet, wonderful, brilliant wife, Jeannie Francis. I was living in her house, and I said, you know what? I'm not shooting today. I'm not going to go in. And she said, that's exactly what they're waiting for. So they don't have to give you, they're looking for you to lose interest in this, because the last thing they want is an actor to, they don't want to. So I got in the car and I drove to Paramount, and that was the last time I did it. And then it expanded. I thought, I know a little bit about acting, and I know about staging on scene, and where people, the entrances and exits. I really didn't know anything about editing. And I spent about 300 hours in the editing room. Again, they were generous, because the editors also wanted to be directors, because that's a very common path, is that editors become directors. So they essentially were vying for the same thing I was vying for, which was to take advantage of the opportunity of being the show to become a director of television. So in the editing room, I learned essential stuff, like if it's the end of the day, you've only got an hour left, and you've got a 1.5-page scene to shoot, what is the bare minimum that you can shoot to give give the editor enough to actually find a scene? And that's really been valuable to me in terms of being efficient enough to work. And then it expanded to the front end of prep, which is I got to go to the production meetings early, and I got to some of the script pitch meetings and the visual effects meetings, and all that stuff, and casting, and all that stuff that takes place before we start. And then the coup de grace was when the shows were shot, I'd sit in the editing room, I'd watch it get cut together, then I go to post-production where they fix the sound and the ADR. But because Star Trek was this big show, there was also a 80-piece orchestra that scored each episode. So I go to the scoring sessions, and and that was all on the lot. It was all at Paramount Studios. It was like a dream. It was, I mean, we kid, because LeVar did the same thing. He took the same path. That it was like going to Paramount University. And then I was given an episode in season 3 called The Offspring, which was a story about Data, who's our android, a lovable android, played by Brent Spiner. Yeah. Data builds a daughter to find out what it's like to be a human father. And any Data story was always a great episode. Brent was great. The episode was written by a new writer who had submitted it, and then he became a big showrunner on our show, and he went to Deep Space Nine, he went on to Castle. His name was Rene Echevarria. So I had Brent, I had Rene. I was so over-prepared, and I had the crew behind me, and it was because you do a season of a television show, and they're not all going to be home runs. So this one turned out to be a very well-liked episode that... and Whoopi was in it. It was one of Whoopi's early episodes, so it had a lot of things going for it, and
like how did you feel first day on set on the other side of the camera?
Well, I realized what a pain in the ass we are as actors, because I was, my personality on the set is the same personality I have as an actor, where you screw around and you're laughing and you're kidding, and as a director, it's like, God, you guys are like herding fucking cats. What are we? Nobody listens to, because how was the weekend? What do you do? And then people would wrestle, people would dance, people were singing. But it was the environment that provided people to feel free. So I was the last person who wanted to rein any of that in. So I said, this is what directors, because some directors really didn't like coming to do our show, because there were times we were so obnoxiously childlike that we wouldn't shut up until the director literally said action. Then we shut up and change gears and do it. And that's selfish.
Naughty.
But we were well prepared, because Sir Patrick Stewart, he came to work ready. He was loaded for bear. So everybody showed up. Everybody in our cast showed up ready, and the stuff was pretty serious. So the work was serious, but the between setups, not so much.
So it's interesting, because you talk about that kind of joking around and having fun, and I really recognise that as something that was very unique to your set. Was that you really led from the front? You were always on the mic, you were welcoming people onto the sound stage, you were singing, you kind of created a real energy there. Like, what's your approach to building that team? Like, when you get brought into a show and you start with a kind of blank canvas, how do you bring that energy together?
Well, I bring that because that's how if I'm comfortable and I'm allowed to, that's how I like to work. But when you go into a new show, I found that, first of all, your responsibility, I think my responsibility is to make the best version of that episode or of that television show you can. So you have to have watched, you get somebody that you trust to say, if you didn't know the show, send me like the 6 best examples of your show. Yeah. So you've done that before you've shown up. And then I always go to the set that's shooting, and I hang back in the background, and you know what it sets like, and I get a feel of whose set it is. It's either going to be the star, which is very likely, the star runs the set, star has the energy, or sometimes it's the director, rarely, because the director's usually a gun for hire, and he's only in there unless he does all the episodes. Or it could be the first AD, who could be very powerful, like Tommy, who we had. He was astounding.
Yeah, he was
Tommy
brilliant.
Gormley. Yeah. And he's a leader. And he had a great sense of humor. Sometimes it's the first AD set. Sometimes it's the cinematographer's, the director of photography set. And he runs or she runs the set, and everybody answers to them. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those characters generally. And if you're coming in as a guest director, it's good to know how the set runs, because you have to fit in to the family in a way that doesn't upset that apple cart, because you're only there for a month or 2 weeks or whatever it is, and then you're gone, and then the next. So I found that to be very useful. I mean, prep is the most important part of making TV anyway, but an important part for me was always to, it's hard for me to be quiet, so I would go and seriously try to watch for a few hours how the set ran and who were the key players and how it ran. And then
I think it's fascinating. It's
my
something
level
very.
That's.
Go on.
You go. Oh, I was going to say that would determine how loud I could sing.
or whether the producer turned the microphone off.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I was kind of thinking, you know, as a director, you bring a team together in a very short time for a very intense period. So if you come outside of the world of show business and go into the world of business, you know, teams are built over a number of years. People come in, people come out. The dynamic shifts, but on a film set or a TV set, once those decisions have been made, in 99% of cases, you stick with them and see it through to the end, and you have a very small amount of time to produce something special. So, do you, as the director, do you carry all of the responsibility on your shoulders, or were you able to share that with the team?
That's a question that really separates the two genres. In film, as we know, which is going to lead to what I know you want to talk about, the director has a very big part in building the team. The director really is, in many ways, the last word in who we hire in all the key positions. Certainly on all the heads of department and the casting. I mean, Tim Bevan, who was a working title, who was our producer, has a team generally that he uses. But when we were hiring our DP, and on a television show, as I just said, you come in and you have to figure out what position you're going to play on the team. So that's in many ways the biggest difference between directing a film and directing it on television, is that you are part of it, and you're responsible for, essentially the buck stops with you.
So I know when we think about the kind of Thunderbirds journey, we were kind of going through the whole process on an absolute high, and then we got to release date, and all of a sudden that kind of energy that had been there for nearly 2 years at that point suddenly kind of disappears.
It disappeared in a weekend. Yeah, it was gone.
So how do you bounce back from that then? I talk to people about pitches. You win some, you lose some. We thought we were there. We thought this is movie 2 and 3 in the bag. They're happening.
I thought I was moving to London. I thought we were going to stay in London. It was a life changer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. There was no preparing for that. Certainly not for me, and it must have felt that way for you. And you were a lot younger. But I think for people, with the exception of Sir Ben and Bill, it was the biggest. And Anthony Edwards, who had been on ER for years, it was the biggest gig for all of us. It was the biggest thing that happened to the rest of us in our careers. And for it to be as exciting as it felt when we made it, which is one of the reasons I think it was moved from its intended slot. It was a kids movie, and it was meant to be out in the spring. It was when so the young kids could go to it on the weekend while they're still in school, and then Universal, in their infinite wisdom, said, "Well, God, this stuff looks great. Look at that. Let's move it. It would make it'll be a summer blockbuster, I'm sure what they hoped." And we opened opposite Spider-Man and Shrek, as I recall.
Yeah.
and we got our asses handed to us.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can blame the release date, but there was something about the movie that didn't translate. I mean, it was massively popular, the Thunderbirds, the marionettes.
Yeah.
In England and in Australia but in America, it was a very cult limited awareness. So there were a
It's
lot of
fascinating
factors.
because I think as I look back on it and watch it, and I've watched it with my daughter over the last couple of years, and it's a really good film. It's brilliant. It's fun. It's got great energy. It's got
Oh, and it
all of the kind of
pops. It's
ingredients. Yeah, the color, the action.
yeah,
There's some great
and it's
performances
light.
in there. Yeah,
It's an action
but
adventure comedy for kids, and it delivers. But that and it's so historically true. Everybody will tell you that your whole life changes on opening weekend, and ours. I went to movie jail, and so did a lot
yeah.
of us from that show. But mostly the
So
director, because the director, I would have reaped the benefits. He's the next, he's the second coming of action adventure comedy, or you're done.
yeah.
Go home, which I did.
And what was that kind of process like of kind of, licking your wounds and bouncing back? Because that experience by no means defines you, but everyone experiences, highs and lows in their life. So
Yeah,
what did you learn from having to get back on the horse?
that was really good. I was very sad for a very long time, and I went back. Our house in LA had been rented, so we were lucky. We had this place that we used to summer in, and we moved to Maine and licked our wounds, my wounds, and I was sad, and my wife finally said, enough already. Let's get on with our lives, and she quit her job to come and take care of the kids in London with me, and it changed. And then the kids loved being in Maine. We all loved being in Maine for a while. But Jeannie, who's also an actor, we were looked at each other. What are we doing? She opened a store. She was productive. She collected antiques and she did design. We bought a building. She opened a store. It did great. And I sat around. Went to the supermarket, and I was. So finally, Dean Devlin, may he always be praised, who I had worked for and known. He called me and said, they're doing a second one of these librarian movies, and I can't be involved in it, and the other director is not coming back because, but anyway, you could come to Africa and direct this TV movie for me. And I said, yes, please. And so I was given a job back at TV that changed everything. And I've been working for Dean ever since. I did the Librarians movies, the Librarians series, and I did Leverage, and on and off for 9 years. So he brought me back in, and then it was a blessing. And then the Star Trek stuff started to pick up, the new Star Trek stuff and other shows.
Yeah.
But it was I was a baby. I was a baby about it. I had never had that big a slap in the face professionally, and you're never prepared for it. But I should have handled it. I certainly would handle it differently now, knowing what I know. But you don't know. Also, all of us, did we not? We thought we were on the ride that was going to take us for years. This was the beginning of a series of Thunderbirds movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were all going to grow old together.
With very spiky hair. It's in the background.
Exactly.
In terms of kind of having to pitch yourself and put yourself forward for things, what's the kind of biggest lessons that you've learned along the way, whether that's pitching yourself as an actor for an acting role or as a director for a project?
I think one of the things I said earlier has been the most consistent for me is if after you've read the material, if you can find something. I mean, first of all, we rarely don't want a job, so I can't think of the position saying, well, really not interested. I've never been able to do that. I'm going to wait for something better, that kind of crap. I've never been that guy either as an actor or as a director. So I find in the script something that I can either relate to, something I believe I can do well, something I really like, and in the interview I will lead with that. And here's what I think about this, and by acting as if you have the job, and this is an interview for the first day of prep, here's how I would do this. What do you think we should do here? Is there any way that we can just have that set expanded so maybe we could connect to this scene, some moment that you believe you could create and improve or embellish or sell to them, so they can relax into, oh, he knows what he's doing, he'll be fine. The same thing with the acting. If you find something in the character, often it's in there in part of yourself anyway, so you can, if you're not too nervous, you can approach it honestly and listen well, and be preparation again is the key to all these things in my opinion. And then having a question at the end for them. If this goes, what do you see as who do you see in the cast, or how do you think you'd solve this problem? Would you be shooting on location, or would this be shot on green screen? You ask them, you include them in a decision that they probably have already thought about, in a way that you demonstrate your collaboration. Yeah,
what's brilliantly clever about that, though, is it makes them take that imaginative leap about what it's like to work with you. If they are having to imagine you in that role, whether it's the acting role or being the director, then you're one step closer to being there.
I think it's good to ask a question at the end, don't you? I think it
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in addition to the thank you and it's been nice meeting you, there should be, it's more of a dialogue as opposed to, I've done my, now I'm going to do Philip the Bastard from King John, and now I'll sing my ballad, and now I'm out.
Jonathan, I could continue this conversation all day. I really could, but I think we need to wrap things up. So, really, kind of final question to you: when you think about all of the experiences that you've had and the success that you've had, for anyone that's listening, what's your kind of big piece of advice for someone that's just starting out on their journey, whether that's in the world of acting or just in life?
I wake up every morning, and before I get out of bed, I imagine or say out loud or think about a few of the things that I'm grateful for. And my wife and kids are always in there, and often my work is in there, and my health and my friends. So I think there's something about thinking positively and being grateful that really translates or sets up my day in a way that something really shitty is going to happen to get me off track. Because I'm very fortunate. I've been very fortunate, and acknowledging that, I find is very, very useful for me.
Beautiful. Jonathan, thank you for being on the show.
You're very good at this. You got me very comfortable. Well done.
I'm gonna let you into secret. This is the first one we've ever shot.
No way.
Yeah, you're my guinea pig, but I didn't want to tell you that at the start.
Proud to be your guinea pig. You were well prepared. You're easy to talk to. You're smart. You're funny. You're, clever. That was a good job, man.
Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalized report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.